And over to you.
Great. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Christian, if you can hit the recording. I'm Alex Cornell-DeHue with Elected Officials to Protect America. And we are putting on a Zoom press conference looking at national security efforts and climate change, which is particularly important for this Veterans Day. Today, we have a number of distinguished speakers from across America who are experts in this issue, but also have experienced this firsthand. The mission of elected officials to protect America is to bring lawmakers who are dedicated to protecting our environment and our country together so we can work together across both aisles to ensure that our environment, our security, and our safety are here for many, many years to come and our future generations. I was served in the Marine Corps, and I experienced a lot of the issues when we look at water security and climate change and the dangers associated with climate change firsthand. While I was deployed on a mission outside Fallujah, a roadside bomb hit my vehicle, and fortunately the person who did it wasn't very good at their job. And as a result, we managed to catch them. And in that investigation, we found out he was a farmer who had been paid by Al-Qaeda to plant a roadside bomb because his crops had failed due to a massive drought because of climate change. And this story is not unique to me. There are veterans across the nation who ran for office who have similar stories, and they saw it when their deployments, and then they also saw it firsthand in their districts where climate change, particularly in this press conference, we're looking at fires and how wildfires from the Arctic, zombie fires, to California, to Oregon, have really devastated communities and created instability. So that'll be the overall theme of this, but what really we're looking at is how climate change is a threat multiplier and creates instability and insecurity. And one of the people who is an expert at this and has seen it over his career for over 30 years in the Marine Corps is Brigadier General Stephen Cheney. He graduated the U.S. Naval Academy and has over 30 years of experience in the Marines, to include the Commanding General of Parris Island, which every Marine remembers well. Brigadier Cheney's military career included tours as Deputy Executive Secretary of Defense to Secretaries Cheney and Aspen, Ground Plans Officer for Drug Enforcement Policy in the Pentagon, liaison to the Congressional Commission on Roles and Missions of the Armed Forces, and Inspector General to the Marine Corps. More recently, Brigadier General Cheney is a graduate, he graduated from the Marine Corps Command and Staff College and the National War College and the University of Southern California. Later in his career, he became a fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, where he's currently a member. Additionally, he was a member of the Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board and the Department of State's Foreign Affairs Policy Board. He is currently the president of the American Security Project. And we are very happy to have him to explain for a couple words looking at the Arctic and national security efforts and climate change. Sir, over to you.
Well, Alex, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I often say it's too bad my mom's not here. She's the only one who would believe it. And another line I like to use is, as King Henry VIII said to almost all his wives, I won't keep you very long. So I try to keep my remarks short. I've been discussing this topic for over a decade at the American Security Project. American Security Project is a bipartisan nonprofit research institution founded in 2006. And climate change and the intersection with national security was one of our founding principles. And we've been addressing this issue from the national security perspective for many years, and no political bias whatsoever. It's purely in the interest of national security. Let me say up front too, to all our veterans that are on here, happy Veterans Day, thanks to your service. And Alex, happy birthday to all the Marines that are on here as well. Let me get right into my topic here, talking national security, climate change, and then especially relevant to the Arctic. As mentioned earlier, I was on the International Security Advisory Board at the State Department for many years, and one of our task force was on the Arctic, and we had several recommendations. And then at the Council on Foreign Relations, we did another study on the Arctic and its intersection with national security. You can get both of those reports online. Just Google either one and they'll pop right up. As an ancillary group at the American Security Project, we formed a group called the Consensus for American Security. And the members are myself. We had a number of flag officers, but we broadened it to include ambassadors, SES folks, a lot of people who are very much experts in this. And then thanks to a number of generous funders, we started a climate tour around the country and went to easily 20 or 24 different cities over the last couple of years discussing this intersection. And it was interesting to me that each city we went to in each county, it just appeared to me that those at the state and local level certainly got this issue a lot better than we did from a national perspective, certainly within the executive department. But let me start by saying it's obvious to us the climate's changing. I'm not going to argue the science here. If you want to, you can go online and see it all. We are just seeing many more wildfires. We know the ice is rapidly melting in the Arctic. Everything's getting hotter. There's been extreme drought. We relate this to a number of contingencies around the world. Syria is one of them, had its worst drought in its history from 2006, 2011, drove people to a number of cities, including Aleppo, which some might remember is fairly famous. So we know it's had an impact on instability worldwide. Specific to today's conversation, we know there's been increased wildfires, certainly fueled by hotter temperatures and drier seasons, and which in turn are driven by carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. This year is no surprise to us when you look to the West, in particular, what happened in California and Oregon. My brother lives in Oregon, my sister lives in outside of LA. Both were threatened by big time fires this year. Unusual in that it's never happened to that extent before. It's just been devastating there. In fact, some of them are still burning outside Los Angeles. But that said, the US is not alone. Fires have erupted around the globe in many places, and they continue to contribute to instability, and they threaten our national security interests. The more these fires burn, the more carbon dioxide is released, which contributes to the warming of the planet and climate change, and it certainly is a very vicious cycle. And the more climate changes, the more fires we have, the more drought, the more sea ice that melts, the more storms we have, the more our national security is going to be threatened. Let me give you some examples of a region close to home that is of great importance to our national security and is on the front lines of climate change, and that's the Arctic that I've been studying for years. The Arctic is warming, and this is no surprise, twice as fast as the rest of the planet. And that indeed is a national security problem. And I'm not exaggerating when I say climate change in the Arctic is threatening the American homeland. Today, ensuring our security does not just mean protecting our borders from external threats like terrorism, for instance. We have threats, and I know we'll address this later, but zombie fires and melting sea ice, thawing permafrost. We know right now that there are Inuit villages that have sunk through the permafrost in Alaska and had to be moved. So we know that there's huge national security implications, and there's certainly renewed great power competition in the Arctic. The warming of the Arctic puts the US on the front lines of great power competition. No surprise here, China and Russia, China, which is just amazing, is actually building its own icebreakers, have expressed and demonstrated their interest in an opening Arctic. I mentioned my membership in the International Security Advisory Board. We published a paper on this, and our paper discussed specific national security significance of the Arctic and the important role that the US can play in regional affairs. And we had 6 specific policy recommendations. 1, demonstrate leadership in the Arctic, certainly on Arctic safety, security, and stewardship in conjunction with the Arctic Council. And you may be familiar, over the last 4 years, the US's interest in these specific institutions has diminished. Our second was to ratify the UN United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. We've been working that for years at ASP to not much success. We're hoping to renew that here in the next couple of years. We need to increase our presence and domain awareness in Arctic. We need to continue to strengthen our alliances and partnerships, including the Arctic Council, with other nations, observers, and other partners. We need to adopt policies and practices to deal with the Russian dimension of Arctic developments and establish transparency and confidence building measures that should be strengthened to reduce the risk of miscalculation in case of an accident. However, 4 years later, many of the recommendations of our advisory board have yet to be implemented. And the Arctic security and significance has only increased. And Russia and China are continuing to dramatically increase their Arctic operations. So to mitigate that threat of the warming Arctic, what we should do in the United States is immediately ratify UNCLOS. And I know that's a hill that's hard to climb, but we're going to start pushing on this from the American security project perspective. Just to give you an example, our biggest argument in the Arctic under UNCLOS is control of the Bering Strait, and we actually have a legal complaint against Canada, not against Russia or anybody else. Also, Russia has put in additional claims on their sovereignty over waters outside of Russia under UNCLOS, but we don't have a seat at the table. So we cannot sit there in front of UNCLOS and argue against any of these claims. So if we approve UNCLOS, doing so will give us credibility when it promotes freedom of navigation, for instance, in the Arctic. We have to ensure existing military infrastructure and any new construction that we have up there is climate resilient, especially in the face of thawing permafrost. You may be aware, we don't have any significant bases that are in the Arctic Circle. I know Alaska has been pushing to create one. We certainly support that. We need to build more icebreakers. I'm pleasantly surprised that the previous administration, or the current administration, not previous yet, has started funding for 2 additional icebreakers. And you might say, well, that's great. We really only have 2 right now, and one remains broken almost 90% of the time. So we really only have 1 icebreaker. The United States has 1 icebreaker. To put this into perspective, China has 6 icebreakers, and they're not even an Arctic nation. Russia has 40 plus, and they've got 11 more that are under construction. I mean, it's just astounding what the Russians are doing in the Arctic. We've got to invest in the development of a deep water port in Alaska, and I know the whole congressional contingent in Alaska supports this. We need it to support greater sea-based power projection and increased commercial vessel traffic in the Arctic, which we know when the Northern Sea Route gets unclogged due to ice melt, which is now occurring frequently, and another dozen or so years might happen 24/7, you're going to see an immense amount of traffic up there. And we are totally unprepared for any kind of accident that might happen up there. You may remember when the Crystal Serenity made a passage throughout the Northern Sea Route, they took their own icebreaker with them. They rented it, and because we couldn't help them in case they hit an iceberg. And up to 75% of the Northern Sea Route is still uncharted. So they actually took their own sonar with them to project down and see that, make sure they didn't hit anything. These are just a few examples of the concrete steps the U.S. can take to mitigate the national security threat of the warming Arctic. But most importantly, and this is kind of the bottom line, the U.S. has to reduce its carbon footprint and other greenhouse gas emissions and find alternative energy sources. The more carbon we emit, the hotter the planet gets, makes melting more rapid. We know the Arctic ice is going to go away. Wildfires, zombie fires, worsening storms, rising sea, droughts are just going to get worse. And if we don't address these changes, it's going to be a disaster on a scale that makes this pandemic look small in comparison. So we cannot afford to ignore the risk of a changing climate, and it's right here at our front door. So I think I've done in pretty close to 5 minutes there, but again, I appreciate EOPA putting this on. It's a great topic and it's a great time to do it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, sir. That was very eye-opening, especially when you look at the numbers of what Russia is doing and how the United States is not preparing and protecting our Arctic the way we could be doing. Next, I'd like to introduce Representative Paul Evans from Oregon. He's an Air Force veteran and has also the EOPA co-chair.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Is the volume okay? Can you hear it all right?
Good to go. Loud and clear.
All right. I also want to say thank you to all the vets that are either a part of this effort or participating today. Quite frankly, I don't think there's anything more patriotic, more veteran-centric than talking about how to protect our nation and our people. As the chair of the House Committee on Veteran Services and Emergency Preparedness, the state of Oregon has a somewhat slow approach on understanding the national security aspects of sound environmental policy but we have in some ways made, I think, significant progress toward trying to at least recognize and begin to address the impacts of global climate change. It is that delta between understanding it as resilience and understanding the threats that are involved with not taking fast enough action on global climate change that is one of the challenges that we face in the upcoming legislature. As you know, this past election brought forward some ideas, and we have far more people than I imagined that really have a hard time understanding science for science's sakes. And at the state level, that actually complicates the politics. However, I can tell you that Oregon is starting to recognize the impact of global climate change, and I'll give you an example. This last year was the first time we'd ever had close to 1 million acres on fire at any one given time in Oregon. Most people think of Oregon as that green, damp place that rains all the time. What we have recognized, or some have started to recognize, is that after 20 years of drought, being defined as less rain than we need to continue the ecosystem at the way that it was brought to us, we have a situation where not only are the wildfires a problem, and now wildfires on the west side of the mountains, and traditionally that's actually been a problem on the east side, but the ability of the ecosystem to repair itself is also impaired because of the changes, quite frankly, in the climate and the types of plants and the types of flora and fauna that actually can be a part of that restoration process. So in Oregon, we are struggling to come to terms with concrete steps that we can do. Over the last 4 years, as was indicated by the previous speaker, the administration had somewhat of a confusing, at least perhaps mixed record on addressing global climate change. So our state's been trying to pick up the slack, but some of these issues, as the general just talked about, are so significant, so big, so impactful that states really can't be doing it by ourselves. So we are looking forward to the next 4 years, hopefully, for a more integrated approach to ensure that we, for example, become a part of the Paris Accord again, and we actually can recognize the value of growing trees and other types of sequestration vegetation in Oregon, because we do that pretty well, but also recognizing that we have to get smarter and better about using fuels that are not promoting more weakness in the global climate change cycle. And hopefully, my belief is that when we can explain not just the national security aspect of it, but the business continuance or the business continuity case for addressing global climate change, that is when we're actually going to see America in general actually approach this the way that I hope we can. In Oregon, we're trying to put things in that particular perspective. We're trying to find ways so the businesses can actually recognize it is in their best interest to think long term. But I will tell you from Oregon, we have our work cut out for us. I'm grateful for forums like this, and I'll try to answer any questions I can from the state perspective. I just want everybody involved to know how much I appreciate the fact that through that national security lens, we can have conversations that need to happen that probably wouldn't bring together the various allies and associates that we're going to need to win this fight.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Evans. And it is surprising, like you mentioned, people wouldn't think Oregon is in a drought, but it has absolutely been contributing to those sadly massive fires. And even in Maine, we had a drought on the East Coast where we'd think there's plenty of water. So it is happening right now. And unfortunately, California has hit most of the headlines with many of the climate-related disasters recently. So Councilmember Tim Goodrich, an Air Force veteran from Torrance, California, is now joining us. Let's see.
I think you're on mute, Tim.
Okay. I was muted automatically at the beginning. We're all set.
The usual Zoom mute. Would be a meeting without it.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Alex. Thank you to EOPA for hosting, and happy Veterans Day to all. As we've covered, it's undeniable that the current environment that we're facing here with climate change is impacting national security. It's been acknowledged by the military for a number of years. In fact, they address it in the QDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review. And so that's undeniable. What I want to talk about is big picture and how it's seeding our leadership as a nation. In the past few years, we've seen Russia and China grow their influence and attempt to continue to grow their influence on the national stage. And with threats comes opportunity. And with this threat that we're seeing with climate change, we have an opportunity to position ourselves as a leader so that we can remain a leader on the world platform going forward. With all the threats that we're facing, climate change, there's going to be a call for renewable energy. There's going to be a need for this, to implement this on a huge scale like we haven't seen before. We've seen it grow exponentially in just the past couple decades. It's going to transform the world and how our energy is secured even more going forward. So it really disturbs me when I see our country denying that climate change is happening, because Russia's not saying that, China's not saying that. They're moving forward and putting money into research and development and growing their businesses that are going to see this opportunity and latch onto this opportunity. And I don't want to see that leadership on the national stage. I think the United States needs to acknowledge the reality of the situation, fund research and development opportunities, allow our businesses to thrive as the world changes in the coming generations here. So definitely don't want to see that leadership want to latch onto the opportunity that comes along with threats here. And it's a sad reality, but it's one that we have to acknowledge and prepare for ultimately. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the local impacts. I'm in a unique situation where we were impacted by the fires that we had this year, especially here in California. I'm in an urban environment. Torrance is a city of 150,000 within Los Angeles County, which has 10 million people. And you wouldn't think that we would be affected by forest fires all that much, but in reality, we were. There were fires just burning an hour as the crow flies, an hour drive in the Angeles forest. By looking at a map, it looks like about nearly 20%, maybe 25% of the forest was wiped out. And this is an area where tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people recreate on a daily basis. And it's really sad to see that. In fact, some of my favorite mountains for backcountry skiing are no longer going to be available for the next couple of years, as they're going to be closed to those recreational opportunities as the restoration takes place. Some of the fires that happened towards the end of August, early September, are still burning months later. In fact, I was on a trip that was cut short over Labor Day weekend because the smoke just came in. And driving down that 395, the eastern Sierra Nevada, Owens Valley, I've seen forest fires because I'm a big outdoors person. I've seen forest fires come through before and smoke in local areas, but this was the first time I've ever seen that entire Owens Valley covered in smoke. 200 miles of just smoke-filled gray skies where you couldn't even see the mountains as you're driving down the highway just a couple miles away. It was really horrible. There's a website, Purple Air. It gives the air quality recordings. And there were days where it was up in the 600s for some of these mountain communities, when anything over 100 is considered unhealthy. We're talking about air quality much worse than what you see in Beijing and some of their worst moments. And even down here in Torrance, there was a period of about 2 weeks where it was recommended that we kept all our windows and doors closed, no exercise outside. And so even though the fire was an hour away, that smoke was coming down into Los Angeles, impacting people, health effects. And I'm sure there's some premature deaths that are attributable to that. So all these things not only impact our national security, they impact our economy, they impact our future leadership, health, and it's time that we enact a national climate plan. And I urge our upcoming administration to do so. So thank you very much. Again, happy Veterans Day, and let's hope that we can address this threat sooner rather than later.
Great. Thank you, Tim. That is a really good point. Most people don't think even in the urban areas it's dramatically affected, but it is. And this is an opportunity for us to continue to lead the world and have our economy prosper when we address the idea of climate change. So next, we'd like to introduce Commissioner Steve Child. He's in Colorado and an Army veteran. If you can unmute yourself, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. That happens every Zoom meeting. So I am a county commissioner in Pitkin County, Colorado. Our county seat is Aspen, Colorado, world-renowned ski resort. During the Second World War, the 10th Mountain Division trained about 90 miles away from us here at Camp Hale. The 10th Mountain Division had fought in two very serious campaigns, one on Attu Island and the Aleutian Islands against the Japanese, and also against the Germans in the mountains of Italy. There were thousands of the 10th Mountain Division troops were killed in those battles. After the war, many of them came back to Colorado because they had learned how to ski here in the mountains by Camp Hale. And they were actually responsible for the creation of many ski areas in the United States, including Aspen and Vail, Sun Valley, and others. So the 10th Mountain veterans are really responsible for our ski industry. Now, the ski industry is really threatened by climate change. The amount of snow, the season is getting shorter on each end, the fall and the spring season. There's more rain and less snow during those shoulder seasons. And they're talking about, the possibility that there might not even be any downhill skiing going into the future. That's why our county and the Aspen City Council, the Aspen Ski Company work very hard on climate change action just to preserve our local economy. Now, I realize this isn't a big national security risk kind of a thing. It's more, downhill skiing is a recreational thing that lots of people enjoy. It doesn't threaten our existence, but it is symptomatic of what is happening with the changing climate, things becoming warmer. It's having economic impacts on agriculture and recreational industries here in Colorado. Looking at the climate change that is happening here in Colorado, we've been in severe drought ever since around 2000. And it's just every year seems to get worse, much like happened in Oregon and California this year. We had our worst wildfire season in Colorado this year. The two largest wildfires ever in the history of Colorado have happened. One of them burned large parts of Rocky Mountain National Park. Some of the fires are still burning here also. The ones that were closer to where I live got a couple of snowfalls on them and it helped put the fires out. But the smoke was very bad here, not as bad as it was in California. But I was also looking at the Purple Rain app every day to see what the air quality was going to be. I was also looking at an app called Windy to see which direction the wind was blowing, so I could tell what our air quality would be like here at my home every day during the fire season. Of greater concern to me, an impact of climate change has to do with our water supply. Colorado is the highest state in the nation. The snowfall that is here is a reservoir of water that supplies water to 7 major rivers that flow out of Colorado to downstream states. Probably the best known is the Colorado River. Now, the Colorado River basin encompasses 7 different states, and Mexico all use water from the Colorado River. There are over 40 million people who use water from the Colorado. there are 5.5 million acres of land irrigated by the Colorado River. And part of what is produced on that is 90% of the winter vegetables consumed in the United States come from water from the Colorado River. In addition, there's major hydroelectric energy production things, notably at Lake Powell. There's talk that there's not enough water going down the river right now. They're talking about the possibility of Lake Powell having to be completely drained and just let all the water go to Lake Mead, because the amount of runoff is so much less than it used to be. And that the lack of the water in the Colorado River, I think, is the biggest national security threat that we have, because it hurts the food production for people all across the United States, much more so than just for 40 million people who live in the basin here. We are seeing climate change refugees here in our valley, even today. People might not think of refugees as someone coming from Texas or Oklahoma to Colorado to get away from the heat in their states, but that's been happening and increasingly happening. People coming up to the higher elevations in Colorado. My home's at 8,100 feet elevation. It stays relatively cool in the summer. And even though it's been very dry and the air quality has been just horrendous from the wildfires, it still is better for people to be here than somewhere where the temperatures are over 100 degrees every day during the summer. So I do see climate change even here in the middle of the country as a national security threat. It is threatening our food supply for the whole country. In addition, threatening the air quality for tens of millions of people from the wildfire smoke. And it's not impacting us like some of the coastal areas where there are increased hurricanes or flooding of, encroaching water into naval bases and Air Force bases at low-lying elevations in Florida are really impacted by the changing climate. It doesn't affect us that much here, but I can see the effect of climate change here on our own land. Our growing season is at least 30 days longer than it was 6 decades ago when my family first moved here. And I'm very concerned about it. We do need to have more than just local, county and city and state action on this. We need to have action by the federal government. And I totally agree with the fact that we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and need to have a robust climate action plan so we can all work together on this issue. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I've enjoyed the presentations of the others on this call, and I look forward to the discussion now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. You bring up a really good point, how water security and the fires and our national security are really connected. The Government Accountability Office put out a report that's 40 states will face water issues in the next 10 years in the United States. And the Center for Naval Analysis put out another report that said 70–80% of rule conflicts in the world are water related. With that, we're going to open it up to questions. And if you have a question, like some have already done, please put it in the Q&A section. Or if you would like to speak your question, you can just raise your hand digitally, and we can bring you on to the Zoom screen as well. I'm going to jump into the Q&A first. And we have a question that says, at least 60% of the world's solar panels are made in China. What can we do to catch up? Anyone would like to jump in there?
Well, I can take a stab at this, Alex. For starters, when you talk rare earths and rare earth minerals that are produced in great preponderance in China, that's a vulnerability that it's an Achilles heel for us. and we need to get off that and find other sources. It's not quite a monopoly for China, but it's pretty close. Let's put it that way. So, and it's complicated, of course, with our relationship with China over the last several years. It's a love-hate relationship. You put tariffs on it, and then you saw the corresponding problems that we had in this country with imports and exports. So it's something that does need to be addressed. We need to find other sources for rare earth minerals, and specifically as those that are provided for solar panels. The price of solar panels dropped dramatically over the last 3 or 4 years, by the way, and started to go up a little bit more with the tariffs that were put on. We'd like to see, obviously, more use of solar power and wind power in particular. It's expanding somewhat dramatically here in the United States, get us off of fossil fuels. I know that was a bit of a controversy when Vice President Biden made that comment about getting off of fossil fuels, but he lessened the impact when he said eventually we will get off of fossil fuels, which is what we have to do. And solar, in my opinion, plays a dramatic part of that. So it's just something that needs to be addressed, and it is a vulnerability.
Great. Paulo, would you like to jump in there? I know your state's been working on this issue.
Yep. Thank you very much. So Oregon was very involved in that trade dispute. We had a producer in the state that unfortunately was pushed out of the business by the Chinese market in many ways. That said, we have, as a state, decided that we can leverage state capital for any construction projects in a way that not only pushes solar, but also pushes acquisition of renewable energies writ large. The thing we want to do, and the thing that we're hoping to do in 2021, is actually build on that, and under the theme of resiliency is good for national security, but it's good for business continuity, push even harder so that not only are we trying to push solar power through state dollars, but in fact, put money into research and development so that the solar panels that are created are actually more able to be efficient. We are working with some of the tech companies in Oregon to invest in those projects. We've put a lot of money into the University of Oregon in the last 3 years for these kinds of research efforts. Our belief is that we need to focus not only on getting off of fossil fuels and getting into renewables, but also when we put the new energy production in place, put it in smaller grids, much more self-reliant grids, so that we also have the ability during and after a catastrophe to be able to get back up on our feet faster. We're trying to wrap those together through grants. We're wrapping those together in new requirements. And I do think that over the next 3-4 years, you're going to see some significant progress on the solar and wind generation out of Oregon.
Great. Thank you. Steve, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, just briefly. I think one of the reasons the price of solar electricity is going down so much in the United States is that we have been importing solar panels from China, who have been able to produce the panels very inexpensively. I would love to have the industry brought back to the United States, but in the meantime, we are actually benefiting from having low-cost solar panels manufactured in China. They've embraced renewable energy in a real big way in China. Colorado does have a lot of manufacturing involving wind turbines. The towers and the blades both are manufactured here in Colorado. So we do have opportunities here still for renewable energy, but I would love to see US industry start producing more solar panels just for our for our national security purposes in case the supply is cut off by China.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've toured the facility in Colorado, the research facility for wind there. It's pretty phenomenal, the research you're doing to advance wind energy. In fact, it's enabled other states like Iowa to be a third powered by wind, which has been wonderful to see. We have another question saying, are coastal military bases or other military bases concerned about sea level rise forcing bases to move, or in general, actually, at military bases affected by the issue of climate change?
You know, Alex, I can take this one on frontally because I used to command a base that is dramatically impacted, Parris Island, which is indeed an island, and now is getting flooded somewhat routinely, just in normal rainfall and sea level rise, which is, they're going to have to put a seawall, and we call this adaptation. They're going to have to put a seawall around parts of Parris Island, otherwise it's going to go underwater. But the poster child for this is the Norfolk Naval Station. And we know that it's going underwater. And some people would say, well, it's a naval station. They got ships like water. Let me give you an example here. The piers at Norfolk are going underwater. The problem with that is the electricity is run underneath those piers. As the water level rises, they don't get electricity. You cannot put the ships next to those piers. They know this. They've known it for years. They are now rebuilding all the piers at Norfolk Naval Station. Another ancillary effect of this is the base is now flooding literally a dozen plus times a year, flooding to the extent that nobody can get on the base, so the sailors can't get to the ships. I mean, you talk about a national security concern. It is dramatic in Norfolk. They're well aware of it. They're working with Hampton Roads. The whole area is working on adaptation. Of course, long term here, we're talking mitigation, because we know what's causing sea level rise. And if the Greenland ice cap goes, you're going to see sea level rise 6 to 12 feet. I mean, it's going to be a phenomenal catastrophe worldwide. And you can walk this all the way around the country, where we have all our coastal basins and stations are impacted by sea level rise and flooding. So it's a dire national security issue.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. That is my operational base, and I've seen the flooding every time.
There you go.
It's dramatic to see. We have another two-part question here. What can individual states do to combat climate change? And then part two is, does climate change risk wars where the US may be involved? So maybe that we'll take the second part first. So does climate change risk wars where the US may be involved?
Well, I'll weigh in. I did hear a presentation by, he was a retired military general, I believe, who had studied the effect of drought in Syria. And his assertion was that the reason that we have a problem with Syrian refugees fleeing the country is all caused by climate change. They had crop failures in Russia, which was sort of the breadbasket for supporting Syria when their crops didn't do so well as having crop failure in Syria. Their crops failed, the people were hungry, they were angry, they moved to the cities. They started, the rebellion started there. The war started in Syria. Hundreds of thousands of refugees were fleeing to go to other countries. So there is just one instance of a war that we were involved in, at least to some extent, caused by climate change. I would extrapolate that could happen any number of places around the world where people are displaced by climate change. They're trying to move into other countries where the people don't want them there. It causes strife. And wherever there's strife, there could be war. And wherever there's a war, we could be drawn into that very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this when I was in Afghanistan. There was the Battle of Farah, and the Taliban actually tweeted out that we are taking the city for the water. So it dramatically affected our response, because after the battle, we needed to do a whole city town hall community discussion of how, and reassure the public that we were going to protect their water supplies. General, if you've seen other places in the world where this is also in effect?
Yeah, I mean, Steve's hit it on the nail, a nail on the head here when he talked about Syria and its drought from 2006, 2011, and backing that up, the Russia forest fires in 2010, 2011 caused their wheat crop to fail. And so we actually have video at ASP of Putin embargoing wheat exports from Russia, which caused the price of wheat to go dramatically up in the Middle East, which was a contributor to the Arab Spring, which a lot of people don't necessarily relate, but it's there. Go a little farther south in Africa and look at Lake Chad, which lost 80 to 90% of its water. And anybody who was fishing in there, of course, the fishing stopped. It was a source of food. There was a lot of migration there. Now, some of that drought has stopped a little bit, but the principal beneficiary of that was Boko Haram and what they did in sub-Saharan Africa. And sub-Saharan Africa is going to be such a catastrophic problem here. When the ambient daytime temperatures go to 130 or 140 degrees Fahrenheit, they're all going to move. So you're talking millions, tens of millions of people who are going to migrate. And you think, where are they going to migrate? They're going to migrate north. And if Europe thought they had a problem with migration from Arab Spring and that whole business going on through the Mediterranean a couple of years ago, this one's going to be 10 times worse. So, I mean, and they're going to gird for that problem. We know it's going to happen. Some of it's cooked in now, but it's just going to aggravate all the tension that you have in Europe today. And they're aware of that. France is certainly aware of it. I talk a little bit about Mali. And when you look at the Tuaregs in Mali, who initially moved because all their crops dried up. And when they moved to the cities in Mali, you had an insurrection. That's what kind of ignited the insurrection that's going to this day. There's a large amount of fighting going on in Mali. And you say that doesn't impact us. We provided the logistic support to the French in Mali to fight the Tuaregs. So it's kind of interesting. And of course, now when you look at the incumbent administration talking about we're pulling out of Africa, we're going to reduce Africa Command, we're going to move Africa Command out of Germany. I mean, I think it's really an ostrich sticking their head in the sand saying Africa is going to become more important, not less important. And I can walk around the world about all this, but it's going to be a dramatic problem.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, sir. And if you go to South America even, and you look at Venezuela, it's a place where we wouldn't think there would be massive drought, but unfortunately it's about at least 50 to 65% less drought in the last 3 years, which has affected every sector, from schools being able to open, hospitals being able to have the water, and the electricity supply because of the dams are too low. And as a result, it creates enough instability where it only took, in many ways, one plane full of missiles and other goods from Russia to keep that person there.
Amazing.
So we can look all over the world and see where, unfortunately, the climate instability is creating opportunities for conflict and other countries like Russia and China to take advantage of it. All right, so
On the state aspect of the question,
Yes.
there are several things that states can actually do that have helped. One is require a certain date that all power in the state that's generated no longer includes coal in the portfolio. We did that in Oregon. It was a little more controversial than some people thought, but by putting that marker out there, it actually shifted the entire discussion about the energy markets. We can also, as a state, put things in terms of low carbon fuel standards. We can change the tax code so that we incentivize certain types of vehicles, certain types of production. Right now in the 2021 session, I'm pushing something called the big house tax, which mirrors what California tried to do. A house over 2,900 square feet would actually be assessed a $10,000 fee that either goes into solar or wind generation or into a pot that would be for the community renewable energy generation. We believe that will actually help pencil out because right now in construction, it makes a whole lot of money for builders. If you're building commercial, it makes a whole lot of money if you're building McMansions. It doesn't make a whole lot of money for smaller, more affordable homes. So we're actually combining incentivizing the market through this effort to try to get more homes and at the same time get more energy production from renewables. The states can play a role, but what we really need, and it goes back to something that's been said earlier, we need to get back in the Paris Accord, because until there is a price on carbon, which is what the state of Oregon has been trying to do over the last 3 years, until there's a price on carbon, there is an unknown, invisible subsidy for stupid behavior. So for example, if it costs X number of dollars to grow a strawberry in Oregon, you can get them from Venezuela, since we're talking about Venezuela, cheaper because nobody covers the price of on the truck from the farm in Venezuela, on the ship to get it to Oregon, or on the truck to get it to market. There's no value in that. And if you look at the economic model, Hardin's discussion of the tragedy of the commons of the fishery of the Grand Banks proves it. Entities are actually incentivized to fish or to destroy the environment unless there is a price on it that actually pushes them in a different direction, because they've got to get that very last profit margin. States can rewrite that incentive system, but we need a federal government that supports us in that effort.
Yeah. Really good points. Yes, Tim.
Can address the state issue here as well. During my opening remarks, I commented about how I'd like to see our country transform the threat into an opportunity by adopting renewable energy and weaning ourselves off of fossil fuels. And I've seen that at a smaller level here at the state, and that's why I believe in that. Here in California, California is one of the first in the nation to really recognize the threat posed by climate change. And in doing so, they invested heavily in renewable energy research and development, and implementing laws such as mandates that we transform to 100% fossil fuel-free electricity portfolio, so on and so on. And in doing so, we've created tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of well-paying jobs here in the state to support that industry. And if we can do that as a nation, we're going to have leadership worldwide on this issue. And that's really what I'd like to see. There's been days here in California where these sunny days, we have so many solar panels on rooftops and these large scale commercial solar installations that we've had to essentially dump excess electricity into neighboring states for just pennies on the dollar because we have a surplus of electricity. If we can do it here and we can thrive in our economy because of these policies, we can do it on a nationwide basis.
Absolutely. And that's what gives us encouragement for the future. This is a major challenge, right, between fires, water security, climate security. But we've seen examples in California and Oregon and Colorado and across the nation. We're shifting our policies, particularly at the local and state level, can have the U.S. lead in this effort. So with that, I want to thank everyone who's joined us. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to respond to me directly, alex@protectingamerica.net, and we'll send out a press release that encapsulates a lot of what was discussed here, as well as a short video clip you can use on your broadcasts. So thank you very much. If the panelists can stay on for just a second, it'd be great.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time. We're just waiting for everything to wind down, and then we'll do a 1-minute segment if you guys would like to use that for your social media and whatnot. So kind of just think about what would be that encapsulates that in 1 minute, the most important aspects of the discussion we had today. And since we do have a general here, we'll let you go first if you wish.
Sure, Alex, thanks. The national security implications of climate change are dramatic and vast. You certainly have recognized that at EOPA, and our state representatives here get it. And as I mentioned earlier, it just seems to me as we've gone around the country and I've gone around the world talking this issue, those on the local, the city and state levels actually get it a lot better than our own executive department gets it. Maybe that's going to change here with the next administration. We'll see. I certainly hope so. But if we keep sticking our head in the sand and stop doing our chase of getting rid of carbon emissions, then it's just going to get worse. So there are a lot of things we can do, and you certainly brought it to light. So I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, do we want to just go in the order that we did the intros?
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to play a role in today's conversation. As I said earlier, I think that there's no better day than Veterans Day to actually talk about the most important threats that our country faces. I do believe at the end of the day, America, when we come together, that there's nothing we cannot do. When it comes to global climate change, which is a clear and present danger, not just to our present, but to our future, it is good business to take clear action right now. It is the right thing to do as a person of faith, stewarding the planet that we were given. We need to do a better job. And most importantly, it is the right thing to do. The planet cannot sustain what we're doing right now. Those of us who are aware of the problem have a responsibility to be part of the solution. And I'm grateful that we have leaders like the General and everybody that's involved in this conversation to hopefully expand awareness and move us forward.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Well said. Tim, you're up next.
Yes, the threat posed by climate change is undeniable, and the effects it's going to have on a worldwide basis, including our own national security, are also undeniable. It's been acknowledged by our military for many, many years. And we can act locally like we have in our own cities on a statewide basis here in California, where we've adopted policies that have allowed California to emerge as a leader in terms of growing our economy and the number of well-paying jobs. But ultimately, what's needed is some federal leadership on this. And I'm hoping that from this and from our success stories in states like California and elsewhere, that our federal government will adopt a national climate plan to address this growing threat, so that the United States can continue its leadership role and adapt to the challenges that we're facing in the future here.
Okay. Thank you. And last but not least, Steve.
Thank you. Climate change presents an existential threat to the continued existence of our country as we have known it, perhaps to the continued existence of human life on Earth even. When I was in the military, we all worked together on a common mission. It didn't matter where someone was from, what political party they might belong to, or what religion or anything. We worked as a team. Your life depended on others in your team. You had a common mission, and the way you accomplished anything was by all working together. I think that's the same attitude we need to take on a national level to deal with climate change issues. It needs to be a bipartisan or a nonpartisan issue. Even here in Colorado, I spend a lot of time working with county commissioners across the state who are, some Democrats, some Republicans, some independent. But in order to accomplish anything, we have to work together for the common good. Otherwise, nothing gets accomplished. And that's what we need to do to combat climate change. And we know we can do it. Americans have succeeded in really huge things before, and we can do it again. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and happy Veterans Day. I think this went very well.